This is one of our last lectures that we're holding on campus. We will have one more, definitely, because a week after week 10, students go on prac. So the only thing I will be doing is holding collaborate sessions, just in case someone shows up. Okay, so what we did on campus. Well, of course, I didn't know what we would be doing because students come with questions or we just chat and things emerge. So what we ended up doing, actually, we were talking about innovation. Why did we talk about innovation? In order to summarize, actually, where we are with our planning. And why do you think innovation as opposed to teaching or pedagogy were the issues? Well, because what I wanted to do is to actually draw a difference between the concept of innovation and the concept of stagnation. Interesting, isn't it? Because stagnation is something that continues to hurt pedagogy. Myths, particular practices, particular rumors that are said about this is how we do it, we've always done it, my mother did it, my grandmother did it, right? Stuff like that. So what I wanted to do was for us to start differentiating between stuff which is innovative, wonderful, has energy, takes us forward, takes you forward especially, because if you want to actually move on with your career and actually start as a teacher, acquire experience, and then move on to more executive positions, you have to have a vision. And in order to have a vision, you've got to have some differentiating or some discerning skills. Otherwise, teaching follows myths and manuals, and this is not always good because actually when you start going into leadership positions, or every teacher is a leader and should see herself or himself as a leader. But once you start asserting your leadership, you need to know how to tell the difference between teaching methods which are moving towards innovation and teaching methods that keep us in the past. Okay, so what do you think we would put here in these blocks? I tell you one thing. Maybe because our classes on campus are early, nobody knew what to put in. So we fought hard, and even though it's interesting, even though I told students what typically teachers put into these slots, and obviously I indicated that these were not good ideas, you wouldn't believe it. 5 minutes later, our students did exactly the same. They thought that innovation is in the activity. But how could it be? How could it be? Activity is already an outcome. So other proposals were that innovation is in resources. Well, you could actually do wrong things with new tools, right? So couldn't be. Couldn't be. And you wouldn't believe we had actually the answer written on the whiteboard. But this is how hard it is to actually, how can I put it? Discern. This is how hard it is to discern, to know actually, to know the difference between what matters and what doesn't matter. Okay, so we thought hard, and what I actually suggested to students that where innovation actually is in thinking, in concepts. It is the concepts that lead innovation. Einstein didn't actually create a computer, and even if he did, nobody could tell the value of it. Right? We had to actually work out the value until we got the computer as we know it. Just to show you the difference, if you took an aeroplane the most modern aeroplane that we have today, and you put it in the midst of a jungle a million years ago, do you think that people would know what to do with it? Right. So what has to change before innovation actually takes off? We need to actually have conceptual frameworks. We actually need to know what we're doing and where. So what we're doing, but what terms inform our action. So maybe activities are important aspect of innovation, and so are tools, and so is many more things. But what's actually important is what informs uh, the way we teach. And people didn't know what we will put under the concept of framework, or what are the ingredients of the conceptual framework that would be driving innovation. How can I put it? It was obvious to me, and I didn't realize that it wasn't that obvious. But what we always have, whatever planning pictures or whatever planning diagrams we're looking at, what continues to be right at the front of all plans are the things we had in a rubric, which is how do you conceive the role of a student in your teaching model. How do you conceive to be what do you conceive to be the role of a teacher in your teaching model? How will you deduce stuff like what is content? How will you be supporting students? All of that are concepts. They're not techniques. They are concepts. And that's what I've been saying throughout the whole unit this semester. It is that the job of a teacher is to be an intellectual. You are intellectuals. You are not tradesmen or workers. You are people who are paid, however well or not well you may think it is, you're still paid to think. Right, so we have to actually now be very clear about those concepts and the kind of assumptions, the kinds of assumptions that underpin our concepts, so that we can actually discern between a pedagogy or a classroom that treats students as, well, what do you think? What options do we have? So, since the learner appears to be here in the center and here in the center, well, in the UK model here, we have nothing in the center. So that's really good. What do we have here? We just have critical thinking and all that. That's all very nice, but we don't have the concept of the learner. Well, that's all right. This is more a model for curriculum design. Nevertheless, I would think we should have a learner. All right. Well, let us have a look now. If it is these things from our rubric that are fundamental to change, and they change depending on the kinds of assumptions that you hold, these items in the rubric will change. So in the 19th century, people were thinking that learner was what? Just an empty vessel, rather than an empty container. We were shoving stuff into students' heads. And it is not that different schools don't continue to do the same thing. We do. But at least in policies, or at least at the level of leadership, we're trying to not do it. We're trying to invent models and give rise to thoughts that prevent us from perpetuating this old model or those old practices where students were just recording machines or empty containers where we were shoving things, preferably in a tower mode, one after another, a thing on top of the next thing. Okay, so now here comes the challenge. If we don't see students as empty containers or tape recorders on which we record information for them to repeat, then what do you think they should be? Right? How will we define the learner? So they're not empty containers. So what are they? What should we be recognizing that students are as opposed to what they're not? So we'll cross out the empty containers. That's done. That's finished. At the level of leadership, this is well and truly dead. So what's alive? It's very interesting because this is I would be teaching the same framework. Doesn't matter if I were to teaching physics or teaching science or teaching now literacy, with the emphasis on consideration of students who come from different backgrounds and especially different language backgrounds. So students are, we can think of students as products of history. Now, it would be good if I could actually type. That would be one skill worth having. What does that mean? Well, it's a very interesting concept, of course, because what it does say is that as you stand in front of your students, or as you are surrounded by them, each and every one of them will read you, will not read what you say, but they will be interpreting what you are saying. And they will be interpreting this, interpreting in reference to what they know. And what they know, essentially, is their history. Or their histories. I should write it in plural so that you don't actually think we can generalize too much. So as you talk and in your class, you have students from different backgrounds in Australia and also from, say, Cambodian background, Vietnamese background, indigenous background. Everything you do, everything you say, they read it through what they know has worked for them so far, right? Not so therefore it is important to remember that meanings are culture, ways of managing intentions, and those intentions are culturally embedded. So, like even the other day, a student, a colleague of mine had an inquiry from the student. My colleague responded, and the student was from overseas, and the student was worried that maybe the teacher thought that her inquiry was like the student felt that the teacher didn't might have felt sort of something negative about her. That's how she read the teacher's, my colleague's voice, which was obviously not right. But that's what happens. And we need to understand. So students and people do not actually read what is said. Rather, they select from everything around them that which is relevant, right? And that's a very, very important concept, because as you are born, and I've said it before, you will never have as many neurons in your life, in your brain, as you do at the moment of your birth. When you're born, you can learn any language. Not only that you can learn any language, you are born with the capacity to discriminate between every sound possible on the planet. And also people from Harvard have done research which showed that infants could also discriminate not only between sounds, but also between amounts. So on the one hand, they show them 365 dots, on the other one 366, and the kids knew which one had more and which one had less. Now, you'd have to search for this research on somewhere on Google. It was done at least 20 years ago. So you can see that we don't actually, as we go through life, then we lose this capacity to discriminate between every sound on the planet. Well, every human sound on the planet. So what happens? We become sensitized to particular frames of reference that are relevant to us. And then what happens? Someone like me comes to an English environment late in life. I was 23. And then because we are used to select particular sounds or particular pitch and particular rhythm, we find it very difficult to actually select for what for English speakers is natural. And the same happens when English speakers go to study French or Vietnamese or some other language. English speakers are sensitized to select, say for example in the case of French language, they select low pitch sounds, but French is actually quite high pitch. So what happens? English people then speak French with a very strong English pitch, which is quite low, and that actually doesn't read as French, or nor does it sound as French. Okay, so what happens is that students are products of their history. They select in reference to that which was until now was they select according to what is relevant for them, and until now at least what was relevant for them were the frames of reference in terms of which they organize what is meaningful and what is meaningless from Cambodia, from Poland, from Afghanistan, right? So what actually happens is what Professor Dr. Jordan Peterson, I'm not sure whether I have put a link here. I might put a link to his lecture where he makes this statement here. You don't have to watch it for this unit, but it is an extraordinary lecture. What he says, he was professor at Harvard and now he is in his hometown professor of psychology in University of Toronto. So what he's saying, reality is not made out of matter. Interesting, isn't it? But out of things that matter. That's very interesting. Reality is not made out of matter, but out of things. But out of things that matter. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? So that's very, very, very interesting. So what I wanted to come back to is this concept of selecting. So what happens now, as the teacher is talking, the teacher functions in, let's for argument's sake call it the Australian system of frames of reference. Right, so let's see it here. This is you as a teacher. And now, what happens to your indigenous Polish and Cambodian people? They function within their system. Maybe if there is any meeting point, that might be like this. But for argument's sake, I just want to make a point. Let's look here. So what happens? Here you come to the class, you make everything you explicit and you make everything meaningful and all of that. But what happens? You are actually functioning within the frames of reference of Australian language, Australian meaning systems. The best way is to talk about meaning systems. So you're functioning within the Australian meaning systems. Your colleagues understand you, and so on, but these people are sitting here and reading you completely differently, or a lot of you differently. Right, so what's learning about, or what's teaching about? Is it about imposition? Whoops, it didn't work, did it? Well, it never works, so let's actually do it again. So let's put it to the front. Is it about making the red blue? That would be even not only not possible, but also unethical. That may happen when students are 5. Actually, you can do that. And it sounds like a great thing to do, but it's highly unethical, wouldn't you say? You don't actually want to whitewash people or Englishize them. Because it's also not very good for Australia. Because we want people to have perspectives. Because we can only have dialogue between perspectives. When we have no perspectives and we're all the same, we're all one, there's nothing to talk about. There's no growth. So what now is happening, what we want to do you see those arrows? What we want to do is to engage students' histories. Right? Engage students' history. We don't want to replace them with an English world. We don't want to whitewash people. We don't want them to be replica. We want to engage. So the challenge of the teacher is to think of activities which will allow you to do just that. And now, if you consider that meaning systems are not like in the dictionary where we may get seduced to the idea that history means a story about something from the past, that product means something that was produced, right? Meanings are not like that. Meanings actually are networks. They are networks like here. So you don't want students to learn words. What you want students to do is to create efficient networks so that when things are said or when students read things, appropriate frames of reference will be called upon. Frames of reference. So first, so that students can, as their speech or as the reading progresses, make appropriate, precise estimations in which direction the text is developing, so when it all finishes they can actually get to the right place. They actually understood it. So my point is, we don't teach words. We need to assist students in creating efficient networks. And that's not very simple. So we need to find a methodology that will allow us to do that. The problem is, of course, that when we are now, I mean, I am however old I am, but when we reach adulthood, we forgot that process. We forgot we were going through this process. And when we read dictionaries, we think, oh, we were just learning words. But this is not the case. So now, when a person says a particular word, and when the networks of relationships lights up, that's very good, but those networks are not present in students. So as you have seen through the various PowerPoints and videos I have produced for this unit, the reason why I talk about expansion, education being about expanding students' frame of reference, I talk about compare and contrast, see what things are, what they are like, and what they are not like. All of this helps your students to start creating networks so that certain aspects of words or phrases, or however brain puts it, start building closer networks, and others go somewhere else. Right? So that's what we're doing. And we're doing that because quite possibly it might have been that in Cambodian it was another way. These things were not stuck together. Some other things were stuck together, and then when people spoke English, they actually were meaning in Cambodian, and as a result they were not comprehensible or they were not efficient. Now what is interesting, what research shows, I might have put the link on your website, but I'm not sure. What research shows that when you have bilingual people, when they actually function in a language, what happens, in fact, it's not like that, say for me, that only, I'm not as bilingual as some are. Well, actually, I speak 5 languages. That's why probably English was my 4th, so it kind of suffered. But when people studied the brains of multilingual people, of bilinguals, they noticed that when speech was happening, it is not true that only their English would light up when they speak English. In fact, both languages, so the Cambodian will be lighting up and the English at the same time. Doesn't matter how fluent. This is very, very interesting. There are also other effects that happen when you are bilingual or multilingual, say in my context. Because I was raised in Polish, what happens is that I can't talk about things I do in English in Polish. That's true. That just shows you how heavily I am Englishized. And yet, I don't feel in English. So the words are not what I say, they're not in my bones. I still reason them. I don't translate. But if you you know how English has swear words and they're good examples or negative words about people. I don't feel the meaning of those words. Whether you say a swear word or you say sandwich, I receive it emotionally exactly the same way. So that's another sort of thing that happens with people who are raised in multilingual contexts. But what really matters to our actual discussion for today is the fact that there is no such a thing like word to an object equation or matching situation. What we have is entire networks, and we need to now teach students to create relevant and efficient networks and and this is why we have this exploratory methodology. In this way, we have now 2 elements fixed from our framework, which is how do you define students? They are products of history. They are histories. They select what is relevant for them. And this is why there will be always mismatches, or often mismatches should be expected between how people in English mean and do things and people from another country mean and do things. So if students are products of history, let us copy that. Let us copy that here. So what will be the role of a teacher? It's very obvious. I already have said it. The role of a teacher is to engage students' histories. And then the pedagogy will be the pedagogy that supports students in creating those efficient meaning-making networks. Right? Well, that's now. You can see when we talk about an approach or principles, right? You can see how high in abstraction we have to hit to actually have an approach, to actually identify the concepts on which we build our teaching, right? So in some of our students' assignments, I was saying this is too detailed, this is not an approach, these are objectives, like being respectful is an objective and will emerge as a result of us understanding that we have to engage students' histories as opposed to whitewash students, right? but you need to say it. The principle is students are products of history. We need to now engage students' histories in order to enable them to create increasingly efficient networks for meaning making. Now that's a wonderful principle. And now you can understand what learner-centeredness has been so much about, right? Learner-centeredness. Learner-centeredness, it's a very confused concept, right? People call lots of things learner-centeredness, but learner-centeredness means creating or putting in place conditions that allow every one of your students to actually create those efficient networks for meaning making, right? Every one of them. This is a bit misspelled because this is American. Every one of them, since each of your students, whether they come from Australia or all of them, if they even came from Cambodia, each of them is different. Each of them had a different way of experience, has gone through different experiences, therefore their frames of reference will differ even if they have lived in the same country. So what we need to do is to enable students to create efficient networks for meaning making, but each of them will do it in their own way. And that's great. And that's great because our students are not machines. Our students will have to now work and compare and contrast the relevance of things to their lives, or in our context, to their projects. And in that way, as they do these things, they automatize the forms of the structures that they create and the ways in which they discriminate between the relevant and less relevant. So now we have these principles. So learner-centeredness, not much an objective really, but it's an outcome of a pedagogy that actually aims to engage in each and everyone's students' histories. Right? If we do it well, we enable students to relate to relate in the process of their learning to the activities that we make available for them on their terms. They relate to those activities on their terms, and then they produce wonderful things. They will be producing wonderful things, and they will do them in creative ways. The more means, the more tools we give them, not only they relate them better, but also they start experiencing freedom. Oh, we don't have to do it all in one way. We could do it in this way and in this way and in this way. And it becomes fun and interesting because we have liberated people as opposed to told them this is how you do it, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. So now, after we've been together for some time and we have spoken about designing units and so on, if I were to summarize the model of planning a unit of work, I would say I would see it in this following way as you see it now on the screen. Now, if you have 2 assignments in your unit of work, you simply repeat it. But you can see that the project has a dominant role, and now you as a teacher, you support the project, and that support is actually is constructed, or how can I put it? It's is what makes up all your lessons, right? So now in order to actually account for the expansive aspect of education, I thought, how can we actually make it simple for pre-service teachers so that you have some plan, so you don't think you don't get lost. So I was thinking that awareness, the kinds of, so we have, remember we spoke about awareness, autonomy, achievement. So support is in those 3 A's. So awareness is you create activities which are about raising students' awareness regarding to how best to make selections in English that actually do the most for them, and in your context, in the context of a project, right? So these are awareness raising exercises. Now, before I go on with this model, I want to stress something that has come up in class and our students missed it somehow, so I need to repeat it so that you don't miss it. Those awareness raising activities can be conducted in class as a whole class. You can also, as you put students in groups, when they are trying to work out a particular aspect of the thing, of the project that they are actually solving, they are also going through these awareness raising activities or exercises or steps. But remember also, students actually, one student said, so how do we fit the individual work as well? It's very important you make room for individual work in your plans, because at the end of the day, the fact that a student had to take the mouse and click somewhere and do something was what made the difference between successful programs or not successful programs. So, and I'm referring here to research that was done in assisting students with difficulties in literacy. So there are computer programs created, and research was done that mentioned exactly that the key to the whole program was that students were put in front of a screen and they had to make decisions themselves. So you have group whole class activities, and the group work you devise in ways where the group works together, then also members of the group work on their own, as so that they can now think on their own, each member, how to solve the group's problem, and then once they actually thought it out for themselves, they bring it back to the group for the group to evaluate the results of this work. It's very important you have that. So coming back here, we have the project, we have 3A's, awareness raising exercises or activities, awareness autonomy. Autonomy is about doing these awareness raising activities in a way that as best as we can, they actually engage students' individual histories. Awareness, autonomy, and achievement. So achievement is that each lesson has to finish on a high point. So each lesson has to have these aspects, what of activity, why and how, and then it has to culminate with an aspect of the project to be finished that was targeted in this particular lesson. So it has to be finished so that students can see that they are, so that students can feel that they have achieved something. Students feel that they are learning as they are actually learning. All right, so it's very important. Part of those awarenesses is that students actually experience, see their learning. Now, the what of learning, this is very much Ania Lian's model. You will not find it in literature, but I devised this tool because it helps me to organize my work, my planning. So you can use it, you don't have to use it, but it does help. So these awarenesses, so if education is about expansion, we expand students' perceptions of what people do, the purpose of those actions, and also how it is done in different contexts, right? It's very important because you will have students from different backgrounds and they have no idea what people can do, and we also don't want students to be bound to the immediate context of interactions that they actually experience. We want through education to make them actually learn what is it that other people do. And so for different units, I devised different units of work. I sort of, as a concept, I have actually planned them. So for example, one of our students in this ELA 201, one of our students is creating, well, I don't know whether she's creating, but I suggested, and I think she did a variety on it, an interactive map So if you were to do lesson 1 on an interactive map, you would want actually students to learn that there are maps, and there are interactive maps, and there are various maps. So indigenous people create maps as a painting, or maybe they have some other ways. Why people do maps? Well, we know. And how people do maps, you can actually show that there are different ways of doing maps. Right. So this is the summary. So we have a project, we have support. Each lesson consists of those activities which are devised to support students. Each lesson has to have an achievement aspect, and the support can be looked at or can be structured in terms of these 3 aspects. Okay, now I wanted to show you something where people go wrong sometimes. So this is an example of one of my students. You don't know the student, ex-student, doesn't matter, the identity is not important. But what's important here, and I just want to make sure that you learn why this, what, why, and how is important to actually keep you. It helps you to stay on track. So the student is saying here, he will or she will produce this kind of structure. And look what the project is for students: to create a proposed plan, so they will be proposing a plan for a cleanup day event, right? So when you look at this with my eyes as an assessor of someone's work, what do I see? This one I can just not see, I don't have to see it. A plan for cleanup day. That's what I see. Create plan. I'm spending a long time, not because I want to underline it, because I actually want you to feel it. So what is it that I will be now looking in that unit of work for? What do you think? And what I want you to see now, that this is not what happened, because being focused as a teacher is hard. It is hard because we have so many discourses running in our heads and so many practices already written on our bodies, but it's easier for us to repeat the past than actually be consistent. And being consistent is very important. So create a plan for a cleanup event. Okay, so I'll be looking for how you're gonna support students in creating a plan. That's what I'm looking for. But look what happened. What the student is proposing here, if you look, we will do this what and why and how, and we will show we hold the cleanup day every year in order to. How relevant is that to a plan? The reasons why we hold the cleanup day, why the cleanup day is celebrated are. What does this have to do with the plan? Cleanup day has existed due to, this is non-English speak, has existed due to the fact that, what does this have to do with the plan? Right? Interesting. And you may feel that, well, maybe he wanted to introduce. No. Because if you want to talk about celebrating particular events or particular occasions, days, having particular special days in the year, you do a different unit of work. Because otherwise, we're not actually focused on task. And if I were to say, if you were to do all that, it would take you a unit of work. And that's very, very important. We need to remember that we have to, as teachers, we have to focus on learning, not on getting the activity done. It will be done, trust me. Because when you get to lesson 4, and when you finish it at lesson 5, you'll be wondering how to wrap it up. Not only that, you may wrap it up at a particular place and then give the same particular thing to another plan to another group of students to finish it off. And why not? And have a collaborative project between different grades or classes. So what I'm saying is there's a lot involved in these aspects here. So not only that, and this teacher doesn't see it because he's still learning. But what's more important here is that we're away from the focus. So you can see the pictures that the person is showing here. What, I don't know, what's giving student background information about the event. Why? And how are they going to understand it if they don't speak English? Right? Nothing to do with the actual plan. On the other hand, when the students were engaged in an activity of creating an interactive map because the city council wanted the school to create one, and if you wanted to actually start thinking of introducing the concept of the map, which is, as one of the philosophers from Poland, albeit, said that the map is not the territory. So what students are learning now, just by looking, and you could do it obviously smarter, I'm just basically browsing through Google Images, browsing how different people work with maps, right? Different people, children, adults, ancient people, young people, parents, anybody, right? So you need to develop in students this understanding that, or at least expose them to the fact that maps are not just for men, maps are not only for adults, map could be fun, map is representation, people do maps, all kinds of people do maps. And then in the Wi-Fi's you show that there are maps on the map, maps on paper, maps on computer, maps on GPS, maps on the iPhone, all of that. Right, so you focus on the project. You don't actually steer away from it because you are introducing then other elements. Now, in terms of assessment, this is why I stressed higher order skills, because now you actually look at the management of the entire task, and now you can explicate it in terms of different activities, and now you get, because different activities, the what, why and how, were informed by specific objectives you had in mind. Now you can actually explicate not just the entire, you can explicate the entire plan of yours in terms of the objectives that inform each of those aspects for each lesson. And now you have your criteria for assessing the entire performance of students on a particular project. And this is why I urged you to use curriculum, but not only curriculum, different curricula maybe, and also different resources that come with representing information in different ways and therefore stimulating your imagination in more than one way. But basically looking into those resources for clues about the things or the kinds of foci that will inform the support activities you create for each of those aspects. So this is pretty much all I wanted to say for today, and that's pretty much most, if not all, we have covered in a on-campus lecture. So just to summarize, we spoke about innovation versus stagnation. Stagnation is still seeing students as empty containers and devising strategies that fill students with information as we see it to be. Right? So we don't want that. What we were thinking is that students are products of history. We need innovation is in concepts that we hold. By now, it is well established and well acknowledged that people are not just empty containers. People select information. They select it according to their history. Consequently, what's relevant for us as teachers is to recognize that how students select will not be necessarily, and how students see the world will not be necessarily the way we do. What we need to do is not to actually impose ourselves on students. We need to create conditions that students can, that enable us to engage students' histories, engage those ways in which students perceive, so that they can see that they can actually perceive things a little bit differently. That doesn't deny the relevance of their perceptions, but it expands their options, and they can see that in different contexts they will actually have to create different networks, because things are not done the same way in every context. So our objective is to engage students' histories and to expand and assist students in expanding their frames of reference, their cognitive networks, their meaning-making networks. And we have to think of these as networks, not as meanings. Okay, and I have offered you a model. You can copy it and paste it in your assignments if you want, because this PowerPoint will be available to you. But it's very important that you quote Ania Lian. So this is Ania Lian, week 9, May. Right? This is a PowerPoint, so it's a lecture. It's very important because it's quite innovative. And I will be publishing this in any case, but it's very important you actually quote, you actually reference things. Okay, so we have a model. The centrality of the project is very visible here, and it's clear that that students that are teaching is through lessons, but it also is through support activities. I have actually identified 3 aspects of these support activities that will enable you to actually organize your teaching. And we remember that part of the awareness raising is also achievement, because we want our students to actually see that they are learning, and as a result each lesson should finish on a high point. Students must finish something at the end of a lesson. So just to show you how I do it in the units I teach. So you identify the what and why and how in relation to what you want students to accomplish in that particular lesson. And the way I structure is like this. So lesson 1, you actually say you'll be introducing the project. It is about engaging students in the activity. So I actually say the what will be people use maps. Right, you show more pictures. This is just a concept. Lesson 1, why people use maps. You can show them some aspects, and now through videos, through pictures, and through talk. Now what happens is, and you can actually put some tools here so that students can actually explore that further. So the more support you produce here, the students can click and identify what's underneath, what's here. They can click here. So the more support activities you create about different aspects, the better, the more you actually break down those aspects, and the more supported students are. But this is, I just wanted to say that in my plan I actually stated very clearly why and then how. So how maps are constructed, and you show examples and so on. So very clearly these are identified. Right, so when I move to lesson 2, what maps have on them, and people can actually investigate what to put on maps. So why maps, why people put, why these things are called. I mean, this is up to you how you will work with those aspects, what, why, and how. But this is how I organize it. But this is just to show you that I'm not discussing this particular lesson. I am just showing you that this is how I actually structure it for myself, so that I can actually not get lost, because it is very easy to get lost. So what this student of mine did, he got lost in that particular PowerPoint, but that's because maybe he wasn't yet that fluent in working with the model. Okay, I'll finish for today. And today we wanted to actually talk more about intellectual frameworks, see how it all works together, and it has to work coherently. So we need to make coherent links between our assumptions so that the unit has a coherent framework which informs our teaching. And every unit of work is not final. It will be developed and redeveloped, and that's really good as technology changes, as your ideas change. So there's so much for conceptual thinking for the day. Thank you.